Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. Today we are going to leave the guideline of this tutorial series with the first video of a chapter a little apart. So to put things in context, here is the guideline of this tutorial series. In Chapter A, my goal was to get you comfortable with the software by covering the essential fundamentals needed to start doing serious things with Blender. In Chapter B, we started talking about a bit more advanced techniques, so we saw the concept of parents and children, but we will also talk about axis orientation, pivot point setup, unit setup, and a lot of other things that will gradually allows us to be able to manipulate a rig, therefore posing a 3 character. And that is the subject of Chapter C. We did an interlude in which we talked about modeling, and I realize that this subject is the main motivation for many of you. So I will continue to make tutorials on this subject in a parallel series, and this video will be the introduction. Modeling will ask you to integrate a lot of things. So for next video of this series, I chose a shorter format, that is to say, a problem, the presentation of a technique to solve it, and a use case. So let's start now. Let's start with the bolt pistol we made by assembling primitive objects in the interlude. By the way, I would like to thank Alcatraz who provided me this file, a file he created following the tutorial, and he provided it to me because I had lost mine. It saves me having to remodel everything since we will start from this file to introduce this new series of tutorials. I also take this opportunity to mention something interesting that Alcatraz discovered. By following the tutorial, he didn't use the same image as me, he used a PNG that contains transparency. And it allows us to discover that Blender preserves the transparency of a PNG in the reference images. And as you can see, it is very practical. It's a lot less intrusive than an image with an opaque background. So a big thanks to him for pointing that out. Now I think I'll be using transparent PNGs for my reference images all the time. So let's get back to this primitive modeling. As I said in the previous tutorial, for some elements such as barrels for example, this technique of assembling primitive shapes can be relevant. On the other hand, for many other elements, like this small element for example, which I called an element of the viewfinder, if we look at the drawing, well, it should be beveled on the sides and not all square like that. But hey, we couldn't do it. With this modeling, we reached the limits of modeling with primitive shapes. So in this series of tutorials, we will learn real modeling by deforming objects, no longer by using the scale tool and deforming the whole object, but by modifying what the object contains, that is, say, the object's data. Do you remember what data are? In the tutorial about Property Editor, I explained the difference between an object and data. An object is a shell, a container whose properties can be found here in the Object Properties tab. The object properties allow us to determine a position in space with the location values on the global X, Y, and Z axes. They allow us to determine the orientation of the shell. Same for scaling. We also have properties for relationships, as we saw in Chapter B. We have visibility properties, and so on. But the most important thing is that an object contains data, where properties are here in the Object Data Properties tab, and depending on the type of data, we have a different icon there. So here data type is mesh. In the real world, meshes could be this kind of sculpture, a network of segments that meet together on nodes. In 3D, these nodes are called vertices. The sculptor could have glued small squares of paper between edges, and that would have given us what we call faces in 3D. So when we edit a mesh in 3D, we work a bit like this sculptor. We deform a mesh by moving nodes. And to be able to interact with nodes, or vertices, or therefore the data of our object, we will have to switch the 3D viewport to another mode. Look at this little menu here. it tells us that we are currently working in object mode. And actually, until now in this tutorial series, we have always worked in object mode. It means that when we select things in the 3D viewport, we select objects. If I transform an object and I display the object properties, you can see that I am acting on an object property, here the location property on the x-axis. So we're going to switch mode and use the edit mode. Edit mode allows us to interact with the data contained by an object. So in fact, this mode could have been called the data mode. There are other modes, either to edit data with other tools like the sculpt mode, or to edit other types of data like with these 3 modes here. But we'll see that later. To switch from object mode to edit mode and vice versa, you can use a shortcut with the Tab key. So there I just hit Tab key and I go back to object mode. If I press Tab key again, I go back to edit mode. And so that's very practical because in fact when we work on a project, we generally work with several objects, and this very well placed shortcut allows us to switch very quickly. For example, I hit Tab to work on this object. When I'm done, I go back to object mode. I can select another object, switch to edit mode, work on it, leave edit mode with Tab, and so on. So in fact, we're really going to use this shortcut all the time. It's really very convenient. So in this intro, we are going to work on this object. So I select it, press the Tab key to switch to edit mode, and there you go. So how edit mode works? Look at these 3 little icons here. We are going to use the first icon for example. If I click on it, vertices appear. So the first button allows us to select vertex. The second button allows us to select edges. So an edge is at least 2 vertices that form a segment. And the last button is for faces. So the faces are at least 3 points that form a surface. But most of the time we model with 4-point surfaces like here. When we select a vertex, a segment, or a face with a transformation tool, the displacement tool for example, we see that the gizmo is positioned at the level of the selection. This therefore means that we will be able to transform the data with the transformation tools we already know. So for this introduction, we are going to do something very simple. We will simply edit the data to reproduce the small bevel that we see here on the drawing. So to do this, we will have to select this vertex and shift them to the left, and the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to switch to vertex mode. Rather than using the button, we have a shortcut. For vertices, it's the 1 key on the keyboard, not the 1 key on numpad, the 1 key which is located above the Q key. Now I can select vertices with the same tools as in object mode. I can select the first vertex, and with the Shift key, select the second. I could also have used a rect box, and in fact, globally, all the tools of this panel we saw in Chapter A works the same way in edit mode as in object mode. So with everything you already know, you will be able to do a whole bunch of things. So, I select those 2 points, and I just make a small move. I selected this one, I shouldn't have taken it. So I start again, I select the 2 vertices, and I do a small translation on X to create my bevel. For the other side, we will use the edge mode. Just to show you, obviously we could have done exactly the same thing we just did, but as way we will practice with edges. So the shortcut for working with edges is the 2 key. I select the edge, which is simply selecting 2 vertices in a single click, and then I simply move them. And here we finish what we wanted to do. Good. On the other hand, now the object has become very short compared to reality. This will allow us to manipulate faces together. By selecting a face, we will be able to select these 4 vertices at once. So the shortcut is key 3. So 1 for vertices, 2 for segments, and 3 for faces. I select this face and I have my 4 vertices selected all at once. Now I can move these vertices like that. And here I start to have something close to the drawing. So as I said, in edit mode you can use all the generic tools, like rotation. Everything you learned for objects before works here too, except now we don't transform the whole object anymore, but its data. The object is maybe a little too wide. I think it should be narrower, so we can either move this face there and this face there, but I can also scale this face there. If I want to bevel in the depth, I can simply scale the face along the y-axis. I can also deform on the whole depth, so I select this face here and this face there, and there with S and Y, I scale the whole object because selecting these 2 faces is actually selecting all vertices of the object. In fact, there are really many different ways to do the same thing, but since you already know all these tools, it's up to you to use the technique that seems most effective to you, depending on the situation. So here you have just learned the basics of polygonal modeling. And that's all for this video. In the rest of this series, we will discover step by step the whole range of tools that Blender offers to edit data. So basically all of these tools that we will globally find in the vertex menu to edit vertices, in the edge menu to edit segments, and the face menu to edit faces. You will see in edit mode we leave the world of exact science a little bit, because in fact there are no tools specifically made to achieve such or such a thing. It is truly a sandbox with a large palette of tools, and it will be up to you to appropriate these tools and use them as well as possible to carry out your project. It is both very technical but also very creative. But you can reassuring yourself, through several use cases, we will discover common techniques, and it is with all these techniques that you will be able to give shape to your ideas later. Thank you for watching this video, and see you soon.